My name's James from Bike Lock Wiki, and today we'll be comparing the Seatylock Viking to the ABUS CityChain 1060. So I've been using the ABUS CityChain 1060 and the Seatylock Viking for around 2 weeks now, and I've been pleasantly surprised with how they've both performed so far. However, I did experience a few small setbacks with both, which I'll go into more detail in this review. To begin with, we'll start by taking a look at how practical either of these chain locks are to use, and then later on in the video we'll find out how secure these things really are by taking them outside and attempting to destroy them with a range of tools. Now, one of the first aspects you'll want to consider when purchasing a new high security bike chain lock is the chain's dimensions and its weight. The Seatylock Viking I have here is 110 centimeters long and weighs 2.84 kilos, compared to the ABUS CityChain 1060 that I have here, which weighs 2.07 kilos and is 85 centimeters long. This shows the Seatylock is heavier than the CityChain, but due to its increased length, it provides a larger number of locking options for your bike, whereas the CityChain provides improved portability. If you're a bicycle commuter who rides on a daily basis, you might be considering carrying either of these in your backpack. And because the CityChain is more compact, it does fit a bit easier into a backpack than the Seatylock Viking, which also fits into a backpack but will be uncomfortable over the duration of longer rides. Therefore, if you're going to be using these on a daily basis, I would suggest leaving them locked up at your destination so that once you arrive, you have access to a high security chain lock. Now, if you're looking for a shorter or a longer version of either of these chains, you'll be pleased to hear that there are multiple different sizes available. I'll include all of the key details down in the description below, so go ahead and check out which size will work best for you. Looking at the underside of either of these locks, you can see that they both use an automatic keyhole cover. This is a feature that prevents dirt and debris from entering the locking mechanism and ultimately prolongs the life of either of these locks. However, I do prefer the metal keyhole cover that the CityChain uses rather than the plastic, less durable keyhole cover that the Seatylock Viking utilizes, which is already beginning to show small signs of wear. Moving on, you will have already noticed that both of these chains use a durable sheath that protects the chain from corrosion, but also your bike from scratches that could be caused whilst locking up. One feature I found that let the Viking down slightly was the way that they'd secured the sheath to either end of the chain. Seatylock used two small wires that are bound across the chain links in an attempt to secure the sheath. After just 2 weeks of use, this has already come loose, which isn't a huge issue, but these exposed chain links could potentially scratch or damage your bike. Another small issue that I ran into was actually with the ABUS CityChain. I found that the logo that's printed on the sheath is flaky, and after just 2 weeks of use, this isn't something that I'd expect from a relatively new product. As you can see here, the Viking is supplied with 3 keys and the CityChain is supplied with 2. One feature of the CityChain's keys that I did really enjoy was its small integrated LED. This is really helpful for locking and unlocking your bike in the dark. Both Seatylock and ABUS provide a key replacement service, meaning if you lost any of your keys, they could be replaced using the custom key code which is supplied with either chain. Just to quickly interrupt, if you find bicycle security content helpful and value the security of your bicycle, it would be great if you could like this video and subscribe to Bike Lock Wiki. Moving on to the locking mechanisms that either of these locks use, I was pleasantly surprised by the magnetic locking system that the Seatylock Viking uses. There's a strong magnet at the back of the locking entrance which encourages either of the chain together, greatly increasing the usability of this lock. The CityChain 1060 doesn't use a magnetic locking system, but it does also use an automatic locking feature. Its internal locking system is spring-loaded, so once partially inserted, the locking system engages and secures both ends of the chain together. Ultimately, both locking mechanisms of these chains are very nice to use. However, I find the Seatylock Viking to be slightly smoother, whereas the CityChain 1060 can require a bit of encouragement from time to time. As you can probably tell, both of these locks are made from high quality, durable materials. I prefer the look and feel of the silicone cover that the Seatylock Viking uses, whilst the ABUS CityChain 1060's hardened plastic housing proved to be slightly more durable in my drop test and showed fewer signs of wear and tear afterwards. Ultimately, however, both of these outer shells provide a good level of protection against knocks and drops for both the lock and your bike. But enough of my rambling for now. Let's take both of these chains outside and find out how secure they really are. Just before we get to the destruction testing, both of these chains were awarded the Sold Secure Gold rating, which means they're capable of securing your bike in higher risk areas where thieves are operating. Sold Secure Gold also tends to be the minimum security rating that insurers ask for when covering higher value bikes, but make sure to check the requirements with your insurance provider just to double check. Both of these chains claim to use 10mm chain links, whereas I actually found on average over several measurements that the Seatylock's links were 9.6mm thick compared to the CityChain 1060s, which were on average 9.9mm thick. Ultimately though, the security that either of these chains offer is best measured by destruction testing, so let's get to it. Both of these chains use a hardened steel protective housing. The ABUS CityChain's housing measures up to 5mm thick and provided impressive resistance against my 1.8kg lump hammer. Its plastic casing was durable and provided good additional protection, and the locking mechanism held strong throughout the testing. As you can see, however, hammering slowly deformed the lock's entrance and made locking and unlocking the lock very difficult. However, it would be next to impossible to replicate this form of attack on the street if you lock your bike properly, and I'll explain how to do that in just a minute. The Viking, on the other hand, uses a slightly thinner 3.5mm hardened steel housing, which was still hard to damage, and its silicone cover provided good cushioning and prevented damage until it was removed. Once the silicone cover was removed, however, several heavy strikes did manage to damage the internal locking mechanism, which seized up but didn't open. As promised, the best way to secure your bike with a chain lock is to keep the chain as high away from the ground as possible. This makes it much harder for thieves to successfully utilize hammers and bolt cutters to compromise your bike chain. As you can see here, I used a multi-tier bike rack to safely secure my bike way off of the ground. Next up we have the hacksaw test, and to be honest, hacksaws are hardly used anymore to steal bikes. They take more skill to use than an angle grinder, and they're considerably slower to cut with, but I wanted to see how both of these chains would perform against this tool. I did use a relatively cheap hacksaw, which as you can see was pretty useless and hardly made a scratch on either chain. So moving forwards, I'll make sure to get hold of some higher quality blades for my next review. Now, my pair of 18-inch bolt cutters were unable to grip the square links of the Viking's chains and left a small amount of damage to the jaws at the front of the blades. However, they were able to grip the hexagonal links of the CityChain, but I wasn't able to make any significant damage, and the jaws did suffer a small amount of damage to the front. Now, my 36-inch bolt cutters easily encompassed the links of both chains. I was expecting these larger bolt cutters to slide through the links like a knife through butter. However, the Viking's links fought off the large jaws and actually ended up completely deforming and breaking the bolt cutters, with only a tiny amount of damage taken by the chain. Despite being one of the biggest sizes available, the bolt cutters I was using were clearly weaker than the Viking, so moving forwards for future reviews, I'll also invest in a stronger pair of bolt cutters. Unfortunately, I only had one large set of bolt cutters available, so I decided to test them on the CityChain regardless of the damage they'd suffered. The broken bolt cutters ended up making a small mark on the CityChain, but all in all, the bolt cutter test is inconclusive and will have to be repeated with a better set of bolt cutters down the line. With most of the destruction testing out of the way, I was left with the final test, which is the angle grinder. Now, for any YouTube vigilantes watching, yes, I was wearing PPE, and no, I do not advise anybody to replicate anything seen in this video at home. I timed both tests to see how the chain's resistance would compare, and used a new 1.2mm grinding disc to cut through either chain. Obviously, this isn't an accurate representation of how this would go down on the street if carried out by a thief, because I have a chain clamped in place, whereas thieves would struggle to hold a chain still enough to make a clean cut. Now the CityChain cut cleanly in 25.44 seconds, and I repeated this multiple times, obtaining a similar time for each cut. The Viking was similarly easy to cut through, and I was able to cut through its link in 23.98 seconds, which is slightly faster than the CityChain. However, the time difference here is minimal, and this could be due to a number of reasons, so it's hard to draw any firm conclusions from this data. Just remember, this angle grinder test doesn't reflect the amount of time it would take to cut one of these chains on the street, as a chain lock locked high off the ground is exceptionally more difficult to cut with an angle grinder. With the destruction testing complete, the final aspect of security for either of these chains that I wanted to cover is the locking mechanism that either of these locks use. As covered earlier in the video, the Viking uses a slider cylinder and keys, whereas the CityChain 1060 utilizes a disc detainer cylinder. Both of these locking mechanisms offer good levels of anti-pick protection and would require specialist tooling and skills to pick. Ultimately, this means picking and manipulation isn't a viable method of attack against either of these chains for your average thief. For anybody interested, I'm currently improving my lockpicking skills to help benchmark lock security in more detail moving forwards for further videos, whereas if I tried to pick either of these locks now, this video would probably be 2 hours longer. The third aspect you'll want to consider when buying a new bike lock is the price. If you are interested in purchasing either of these locks, you can find the links down in the description below. The Seatylock Viking retails for roughly $100 on the Seatylock website, whereas ABUS aren't a retailer, but you can find the CityChain 1060 for sale anywhere between $120 to $150. Another aspect that I'll be considering much more in my videos and on the Bike Lock Wiki website moving forwards is the sustainability of manufacturers. Now, I spoke to Michael Shankerman, who's the CEO of Seatylock, and asked him what Seatylock are doing at the moment to reduce their environmental impact. Michael let me know that Seatylock are currently in the process of removing single-use plastics from their packaging, which is definitely a step in the right direction, but I do feel that Seatylock could be doing more to lessen their impact on the environment. On the other hand, as a well-known worldwide brand, ABUS are doing slightly more to promote sustainability within their product range and manufacturing. They've removed single-use plastic bags from their product range, whilst also boasting a 99% waste diversion rate during their manufacturing process, which is undeniably impressive. However, with sustainability, there's obviously always more that can be done, so I'm looking forward to hearing future updates on how either of these companies are lessening their impact on the environment. With both of these chains, you'll receive a warranty. The CityChain 1060 supplied with a 2-year warranty, whereas the Viking is supplied with a 3-year warranty. As I've already covered, however, due to the high build and material quality of either of these chains, I don't see you having any issues with either product. To summarise, I'd happily use either of these locks to secure my bike. Now, both of them had their setbacks, but I haven't discovered any major issues with either chain. If I was forced, however, to decide which chain I'd use, I'd say the Viking edges it ever so slightly. It retails at a slightly more affordable price than the CityChain, and its square links were able to slip out of the drawers of my smaller bolt cutters. That being said though, there really isn't much separating either of these chains. Say I was fortunate enough to be riding a top-of-the-range e-bike, I'd probably consider using another lock alongside either one of these chains, as your bike is going to be an ideal target to thieves. Alongside this, remember to always keep your lock as high away from the ground as possible, and you eliminate and reduce the risk of many different forms of attack. As we saw, further destruction testing is required here with a stronger pair of bolt cutters. I also have no doubt that with a higher quality set of bolt cutters, I'd have been able to cut cleanly through either of these chains. Bear in mind, however, that large bolt cutters like I used are extremely difficult to conceal, so it's highly unlikely that a thief would use these on the street, and they'd probably opt for a cheaper pair of bolt cutters than I bought anyway. Additionally, the Seatylock Viking can normally be found at a slightly lower price than the CityChain 1060. And again, if you're interested, I'll leave all of the links and product details down in the description below. If you've decided neither of these locks are for you, Feel free to check out some of my other video reviews, or go ahead and head over to the Bike Lock Wiki website for plenty more bicycle security reviews. Finally, if you found this video helpful and want to stay up to date with the latest bicycle security news, hit the like button down below and make sure to subscribe to the Bike Lock Wiki channel for plenty more security content. Thanks very much for watching, and as always, lock it or lose it.